Hello, hello again. This is day one, the second week of Knowledge and Reality, 1204. So this Blackburn reading is an overview of Descartes' meditations, and it's helpful to read it both because one, this is a classic text. Well, the meditations are a classic text, so they're worth understanding thoroughly, and that can be a little bit more difficult because Descartes wrote in Latin some odd hundreds of years ago. So Blackburn is introduced here so that you can get a more modern perspective on what's going on and really understand the text. So you'll have multiple ways of getting a sense of what's happening. So today I'm just going to very systematically overview the reading. So that was, I believe it was page 15 through page 28, and that's in the Think book by Blackburn. So this is a chapter on knowledge, and it begins with a discussion of the background surrounding Descartes' project. So the way Blackburn characterizes the issue is largely a matter of Descartes' response to the challenge of the scientific worldview. So as a result of the Copernican revolution and various other happenings in the scientific world, there was an increasing sort of belief that the universe was sort of didn't care about our interests, ends, and goals, that everything was just molecules in motion. So Galileo is famous for thinking that there is nothing but just atoms moving around in various ways. Of course, he didn't have the same sort of modern sense of atom that we have, but the same sort of idea that it's just little bits of matter, and that's all there is to the picture. And so this seems like it posed a major challenge to some of the things that Descartes held dear and things that people in the modern day also hold dear. And these are things like God, freedom of the will, and the existence of a soul. So in that respect, Descartes is somewhat similar. He's, part of the reason why it's the early modern period is because a lot of the same ideas and traditions are prevalent in the early modern period are still around today. So Descartes wanted to find a way to make sense of this scientific worldview and make it compatible with the view of of religion and freedom of the will and that sort of thing. So here's just an emblematic quote of that thought. Descartes intends to rescue the modern worldview from the charge of atheism and materialism. So atheism, that there is the belief that there is no God, and materialism, the belief that all there is matter, right? So there's nothing besides matter and its various arrangements and things that arise as a result of it. So that's the challenge. That's the background that motivates the project that is the meditations. So from here, Descartes just develops a sort of systematic argument to try to make sense of our world and to account for these sorts of things like our knowledge of God and our knowledge of the soul or the mind or those sorts of things. So the first thing that Blackburn covers is meditation 1, and this is in the section called the evil demon, and I guess that's just because that's the most memorable part of this section. So in this section, the evil demon, he just systematically covers meditation 1, and he does it in a really clear way, very briefly. So if you're ever confused about what happens in meditation 1, this is the best way to probably quickly review. It's just on pages 18 and 19, and so he just lays out the three main arguments in meditation 1, that is the part of prudence argument, the dream argument, and the evil demon argument. And I cover these in a bit more detail later, but I'll just briefly summarize them. So the idea in the part of prudence argument, it's an argument against sense perception as a means to gain knowledge. So the general project, just to overview, is that in the meditations, Descartes wants to create a certain foundation for all knowledge. So in doing this, the first thing he does is tears down everything we thought we knew. And so of the things that we believe that, for one, sense perception is reliable, and then we have a huge array of facts that arise as a result of this basic belief, right? Like, you presumably believe that there's a human speaking to you that recorded on a computer, and this isn't just a sophisticated robot that is recording or something like that. And I believe that there's a cup of coffee on my desk. And these are all based on sense perception. So if Descartes can undermine these very foundational beliefs, like that the senses are reliable, he can undermine all of our knowledge, and then we can start afresh with certain foundations to justify all of our beliefs in things like God and freedom of the will and the soul and a wide range of other things. So now I'll go back over the part of prudence. So the part of prudence argument towards the end of undermining all of our principles of knowledge is that the senses have misled us before, and if the senses have misled us before, then we shouldn't trust them, so we shouldn't trust the senses. That's the basic idea. So if we're trying to establish certain knowledge, then we should never trust something that has led us astray, because of course it's not certain if it's ever erred. So don't trust the senses. Right. So the dream argument then is another argument against the senses. And this argument is in support of the part of prudence argument. So you might think that this is an insufficient, the part of prudence argument isn't going to work by itself, because you'd have to be crazy to seriously doubt that you have hands, or that there are books, in front of you, or something like that. I don't know where you're sitting, but something to that effect. So you might also say that it seems like in a dream that these same sorts of things are quite certain at any given moment, right? It seems very reasonable to believe that there's a coffee cup in front of me, and I've had dreams where I'm at my desk and there's the same sort of mundane things in front of me. So we have further reason to doubt the senses on these sorts of grounds. And I break this down a little bit more systematically in the forthcoming lectures, but I just want to give a broad overview, so I won't go any more detailed than that. So after the dream argument, he provides some reasons for doubting the dream argument, including, dreams are ultimately based on something real, just like paintings. So even if a dream is crazy and fanciful, it's still going to be at least loosely based on things that are occurring in real life. Like, objects will still be extended in space and occur through time. They'll have the same sorts of colors, or at least the same range of possible colors that we normally experience. So we don't have reason to doubt everything yet. And that's the goal, right? To tear down everything we thought we knew and start anew. So far, Descartes, in the part of prudence argument and the dream argument, has just given us reason to doubt the senses. So what is left? You take a minute and think about it. How do you know 2 plus 2 equals 4? Well, maybe you were taught, but I could give you some other random computation that you've never done before, and it doesn't seem like it requires you to go out in the world and look under a tree or something to figure it out. It seems like it's just a matter of reasoning as opposed to the senses. So we still have reason, is the thought. So for this reason, the evil demon is introduced. And so the evil demon thought is simply the idea that it is possible that there is an evil demon. And this evil demon is evil in that he tricks us at every moment. He makes us think that, we're doing things when nothing's going on, or he makes me think that 2 plus 3 equals 5, when really it equals 7 or something, I don't know. But something to that effect. He can constantly deceive us at every moment. And so, even if you might think that, for example, we could tell whether or not we're dreaming based on the coherence and stability of the dream, you might think that an evil demon could trick us and even make an entirely illusory experience coherent and consistent and complete, like maximally self-contained, in this sort of way that we'd have no means to tell whether or not it's real. And so Descartes isn't committed to the actuality of the evil demon. All that needs to be the case is that it's possible for such a being to exist, and if it's possible, then we have some small reason to doubt what we think we know. And if we have some reason to doubt what we think we know, that's sufficient to not trust what we think we know. Because after all, we're trying to establish certainty, right? So certainty is the goal, and the evil demon seems to deprive us of certainty at every step, because even the most basic things could be just some sort of strange error, right? There's people that are completely convinced of crazy things, and they will just keep saying, no, it's obvious, I know it to be true as much as I know anything, and you might just think, well, that's not sufficient, the evil demon's there. So, with these 3 arguments in place, Descartes undermines everything we think we know. So he's starting afresh. We've bulldozed all of our previous knowledge. And with this rubble, we can rebuild a foundation that allows for certainty. So what do we still know at the end of the day? Well, we know basically one thing. And this simple thing is the cogito. And the cogito ergo sum, is sometimes translated as I think therefore I am. And a better translation is I think therefore I am a thinking thing. So the idea here is not a metaphysical thing that what makes us exist is our thinking. The issue is an epistemic one. It's about what we can claim to know. So how do you know that you exist? You know you exist because there's thoughts going on. There's some experience. So even if every single piece of my experience as I look around, as I think to myself, it could all be mistaken, it could be utterly false, I could be completely schizophrenic, and just imagining every single thing going on around me, it still seems to be the case that there's something going on, and that something is thinking, some sort of cogitating, right? So if you put it in terms of the evil demon might be deceiving me, but the fact that he is deceiving me, or the possibility that there's someone to be deceived, presupposes a subject. So there's something there to be deceived, and that necessitates one simple fact, and that I think therefore I am sort of thing. And so from this thought, Descartes derives some more interesting conclusions. So he thinks to himself, so how do I know this sort of thing? This is a fact that is known through thought, and by thought we mean reasoning, the intellect, as opposed to the senses or imagination. And so for this reason, he thinks that the thought is distinct from the body. But it seems like we know about bodies, and this is a matter of the senses, right? Like I look around and I see all these things, and by bodies I don't mean like human figures. I mean any object is a body in this sense. So it seems like we know about bodies, and it seems like we can claim that there are bodies as a result of what we look around and see, but Descartes wants to say that even this sort of knowledge is a matter of reason. So the key point here, the connection between the two, is that the way that we come to know this simple fact is the same as we come to know bodies, and it's both a product of reason. So this is, as I note at some other point in the next lecture, this is why Descartes is called a rationalist, because it's a matter of reasoning that leads us to knowledge, not a matter of empirical evidence. So Descartes introduces this wax argument. This is meditation too, by the way. Descartes introduces this wax argument, and the wax argument is an argument that tries to show that we know about even bodies via reason alone. So here's one rendition of the argument. This is kind of a different way of doing it that I haven't presented it in the past, but I think it's fairly clear. So hopefully this is helpful. So the initial claim is that knowledge is either from the senses, reason, or imagination. So one of those three means is the only way that we come to know things. This third category is a little strange, but Descartes seems to hold it to be the case. So we'll go with him, be charitable, and assume that there are three categories as opposed to just two. So, and then after saying that at least all knowledge has to come from at least one of these three, he goes about and sort of deduces which one it is. So first he eliminates imagination. So it's not from the imagination because we cannot envision all the forms that the wax might take. So the thought here is that we know that the wax is the same piece of wax not because we can predict exactly what form it will take. So there's some wax that melts, all of its sensible properties change. Even if everything about it, the way it smells, the shape it takes, all these other things change, we might not be able to predict that. We might not be able to envision it in our mind's eye. So this suggests that it's not us being able to project with our imagination. Also, I already sort of hinted at this, the reason why it's not from the senses is because all the sensible properties change. So you take a piece of purple wax or something like that, it's firm, it's cylindrical, it has a certain honey smell or something like that. It makes a clicking noise when you hit it, and then you melt it, and all of those things will change. The wax will turn clear, it'll lose its smell, it'll be soft and mushy, and so when you hit it, it doesn't make any sound. So it's clearly not by just looking at it, right, through our senses alone, that we come to know that it's the same piece of wax, because it is the same piece of wax, clearly enough, right? The way that we're able to know this is that we can hold it in our mind's eye through reason over time. And that is explained by reason as opposed by the senses. So he says a similar thing about a person in the distance wearing a coat, right? It's not that we can see that there's a person there. It's that we reason, we make a conjecture and say, there's a person inside of that coat. That's what explains this moving coat, right? You might imagine a winter day and someone 200 yards away and you can't see their face or anything. So these arguments will be dealt with in a little bit more depth, but I don't want to be too terribly redundant. This is just an overview of the first two meditations. Hopefully this will make much more sense if you've already read the Blackburn. I already sort of was presupposing that you had some familiarity with the wax argument, and I didn't introduce it as thoroughly as I could have. But so maybe go read that and then come back if you haven't already. But that's just a quick overview of the first two meditations, and then Blackburn provides some issues that he has with these meditations, and I'll quickly overview these because this is an interesting point at which, for this week's writing or something like that, you can interject and say, oh, Blackburn's reasons are good for this additional consideration, due to this additional consideration, or Blackburn's criticism of Descartes is ill-founded for this other reason. And I might also ask you at some point, what might be a criticism of the part of prudence argument? And the answer if it were multiple choice, the answer I'd be looking for is it might seem like a hasty generalization. So hopefully that becomes clear enough from reading and from listening to the lectures. So we'll go over these motivations and questions that Blackburn introduces. So the first one is the problem of hyperbolic doubt. That's my term for it and not his. So the idea is that Descartes takes this really strong position that he's going to doubt everything unless it's proven to be absolutely certain. And you might think that this is a bit hasty of a procedure. So it seems like, the newspaper makes mistakes. That's a fact. But it seems like it would be inappropriate to say, therefore, I should never trust the newspaper. That's just a little bit drastic. So Blackburn's consideration here to sort of support Descartes is that the claim is not that all sense perception deceives, but that any particular sense perception may deceive. And that's a much more modest claim. And this is what's called a suppressed or implicit premise, right? So it's not something he explicitly says, but it's a charitable way to interpret Descartes to make sense of the overall argument. So this now makes sense if we transpose this example to the case of the newspaper, right? So it's not that we should never trust the newspaper, but it does seem to be the case that any particular sentence in a newspaper or something like that may deceive us or may be mistaken. It's probably not, but it might be, so we might always have to be a little bit skeptical. But the issue with this is that it sort of presupposes that there's something that's real and something that's illusory, and this basis of comparison is what underpins this sort of distinction at all, right? You can't make a distinction between real and illusory unless there's something real. So this is the point at which the dream argument comes in. So this is a little redundant, but it's a good way of making sense and explaining it. That's why it's the motivation section. So Blackburn says dreams seem qualitatively different. He calls them jerky and spasmodic, right? They lack this certain sort of continuity. But the thought is that this could be part of the illusion, and that would just be a feature of a creature like the evil demon. So an evil demon could certainly make it seem that dreams are jerky or illusory, and then waking life is smooth and contiguous, but that could also just be illusory, right? That might not reflect the real world. That could just be part of the grand deception. So this possibility can make sense of why we have this supposed distinction that's not well justified, because it's based on our experience, and we can't know for certain that our experience is certain. And then Blackburn just gives a modern imaginative example, and that is of the brain in a vat. So the idea is just along the lines of the Matrix, namely that you're plugged into a machine or something, or just a brain is, and it's stimulated and nourished in all the appropriate ways to make everything seem just the way it is now. And that world could be perfectly stable and coherent, but that doesn't show that it's real by any means. So there's a real challenge here in terms of justifying what we think we know, and it's a result of this sort of hyperbolic doubt or radical skepticism, skepticism in which we doubt everything. And it seems at this point the only thing that we can know for certain is that there is some thinking going on, or as he says, that I think. So that's a brief rundown, and if you have any questions, as always, please ask. Alright, thank you for your time.